I'm glad you're here. Stay with me to the very end, and somewhere in the comments tell me the town you're watching from, because I like knowing how far this story has traveled. The casseroles were still in my refrigerator when Russell's sons decided what to do with the rest of my life. People had brought food after the funeral, the way people do, and most of it I would end up throwing out untouched. But on the third afternoon, before a single dish had spoiled, Wesley and Dean were already sitting in their father's study, dividing me up like a problem on a whiteboard. I had been married to Russell Hale for 19 years, long enough to know the weather of a man, long enough to know which floorboard in that house creaked and which one his father had fixed in 1961 and never let anyone forget about. I knew Russell's good moods and his bad ones, the way he hummed when he was working through a numbers problem in his head, the exact pressure of his hand on the small of my back when we walked into a room full of people he didn't trust. 19 years, and his 2 grown sons looked at me across that desk like I was a tenant whose lease had just run out. The study smelled like him. Pipe tobacco he'd quit 15 years ago, but never quite aired out. Cedar from the shelves. The leather of the chair I was sitting in. I had my hands flat on the desk because I didn't trust them to stay still. "Vivian," Wesley said. He always said my name like he was setting it down on a table he might want to clear later. At 47, he had his father's height and his father's jaw and absolutely none of the thing that had made his father worth marrying. He ran a commercial development outfit in Dallas, and he wore the success of it the way some men wear cologne, a little too much, noticeable from across the room. "We should talk about logistics, before things get complicated." Dean sat to his left, 2 years younger, softer in the face. The kind of soft that comes from a life of being the second favorite and resenting it quietly. He'd built something in Scottsdale he called a private wealth practice, which I had learned over the years was a phrase that could mean almost anything or almost nothing. He had his hands folded like a man at church. "We just want it to be smooth, Viv. For everybody. Dad would have wanted it smooth. Dad would have wanted it smooth." Russell had been in the ground for 72 hours, and they were already speaking for him. "What kind of logistics?" I said. Wesley opened a folder. He'd brought a folder. To his father's funeral week, he had brought a manila folder, and there was something almost admirable in how little he tried to hide it. "The estate," he said. "Crestline, the house here, the place on the lake. There's a lot to untangle, and the longer it sits, the harder it gets. We thought we'd save you the headache." Crestline Millwork was the company Russell built from a 2-man shop into a 40-employee operation that made cabinetry and architectural woodwork for half the nice buildings in the city. He'd started it at 30 with a table saw and a line of credit his own father wouldn't co-sign, and he'd run it for almost 40 years. The men on that floor came to our Christmas party. I knew their wives' names. "What about it?" I said. "It comes to us," Dean said gently, as if he were telling me the weather. "Wes and me. Dad always said the business stays in the family. You understand. It's a bloodline thing." There it was, bloodline. 19 years of carrying that family's water, of hosting Russell's clients, and nursing Russell's mother through her last winter, and sitting in a beige hospital hallway for 3 months while Russell's body gave out one system at a time, and the word they reached for was bloodline, as though love were a weaker fluid than the kind you're born with. "The house in Indian Hill," Wesley went on, reading from his folder now, "appraises around 1.1. The lake cottage at Cumberland is roughly 600. Those come to Dean and me as well, per Dad's wishes." He looked up. "There's a life insurance policy. You'll be taken care of. It's not a fortune, but it's fair." "How much?" I said. "Modest," Dean said. "How much, Dean?" "80,000. Wesley said, and he said it without flinching, which is the part I remember most. $80,000 for a 61-year-old woman who had given up a bookkeeping career she was good at to keep this family's house and this family's appointments and this family's holidays running on time for 19 years. $80,000 to start over with. I looked at the photograph on the corner of the desk, not of Wesley, not of Dean. A small framed picture of Russell and me at a county fair the second year we were married, both of us holding paper cups of lemonade, both of us squinting into a sun I could no longer feel. "And the house?" I said. "When would I?" "We're not throwing you out, Viv." Dean reached across and patted my hand, and his palm was damp. 45 days, So you can sort out where you're going. We think that's generous, honestly. Generous. 45 days to dismantle 19 years. There's one more thing, Wesley said, and I learned that day that I could hear a trap closing before I could name it. He slid a second sheet across the desk. Dad's last months were expensive. The insurance fought a lot of it. There's about $90,000 in medical that's outstanding, and because you were his spouse and signed off on the care, the providers are looking to you. We'd help, but our hands are tied until probate clears. $90,000 in debt, $80,000 in insurance. They had done the math before they walked in. They had sat somewhere, probably at Wesley's kitchen island over good coffee, and worked out a number that would leave me $10,000 in the hole and homeless in 45 days, and then they had driven over to their father's house to deliver it to my face with their hands folded. I see, I said, though I didn't see anything yet. Not yet. It's nothing personal, Dean said. It's just how these things go. Of course, I said. Of course it is. They left within the hour. I watched them from the study window as they stood by Wesley's car in the driveway, and they were laughing about something, the loose, easy laughter of men who think the hard part is behind them. Neither one looked back at the house. Neither one looked back at me, and I should have felt destroyed. I waited for it, the collapse, the part where I slid down the wall and stayed there. It didn't come. Instead, something cold and very quiet settled into me, and it stayed. That night I couldn't sleep, so I did what I'd been doing every night since the hospital. I lay in the dark and played the voicemail. Russell had left it 11 days before he died, one of his clearer afternoons, when the morphine was light and he sounded almost like himself. I'd saved it the way you save anything you're afraid is the last of its kind. I knew it by heart. His voice, rough but warm. Hey, it's me. They moved my appointment. Don't come till 4. And listen, Viv. I keep meaning to tell you, and then the nurse comes in. There's no rush, but when you're ready, go see Frances. She's got the rest of it. The rest of what I owe you. Then a long pause, the kind where you can hear a man deciding how much to say on a machine. You always thought I didn't notice things. I noticed everything. Go see Frances when you're ready. I had played that message 40 times and let it wash over me as grief. The rest of what I owe you. I'd taken it as a dying man being sentimental. But that night, lying in the dark with $80,000 and 45 days hanging over me, I heard it differently. Go see Frances. I didn't know any Frances. Russell's attorney was a man named Howard Pratt, slick and gray and useless, who'd already called twice to tell me how sorry he was and how simple everything would be if I just signed where the boys' people told me to. I'd never heard Russell mention a Frances in 19 years. But Russell Hale did not waste words, especially not his last ones. He'd put a name in my ear on purpose. Howard Pratt's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, all glass and chrome and the specific hush that money buys. He came around his desk to take both my hands in his, and I let him, and I watched his eyes while he did it. They were the eyes of a man who'd already had a different conversation about me with somebody else. Vivian, how are you holding up? Truly. I'm managing, Howard. You're strong. Russell always said so. He guided me to a chair like I might tip over. Now, I know this is the last thing you want to think about, but the boys are eager to move forward, and frankly, the kindest thing for everyone is to keep it simple. Sign the releases, take the insurance, let the family handle the family assets. No lawyers, no fighting. You don't want to spend your grief in a courtroom. And if I did want to fight, I said, hypothetically, would I have a case? Something flickered behind his face, just a flicker. I'd advise strongly against it. The will is clear. A contest would take years, drain you dry, and turn this family against you forever. You'd lose, and you'd lose ugly. He smiled. I've known these boys since they were in shorts, Vivian. Don't make this a war. I'd known these boys since they were in shorts, too. I'd known them since Wesley was a sullen teenager who called me his dad's girlfriend 3 years into the marriage, since Dean got engaged twice and asked Russell for money both times. Howard talked about them like they were the wronged parties, and that was the moment I understood that Howard Pratt was not my lawyer. He was their lawyer wearing my dead husband's old letterhead. You're probably right, I said, because there's no faster way to make a man relax than to agree with him. Let me just get through the next few days. I'll call you. That's the spirit. He walked me to the elevator with a hand on my shoulder. Don't read the documents too closely, by the way. The legal language is designed to frighten people. Just sign and breathe. Don't read the documents too closely. I have thought about that sentence many times since. A man tells you not to read the thing he wants you to sign, and he thinks he's being kind. In the elevator going down, I called the only Francis I could find. It took an hour of searching Russell's old papers that morning to turn up a business card tucked inside a book on his shelf, a book about timber framing he'd had for 30 years. Francis Okonkwo and Reese, attorneys. There was a handwritten line on the back in Russell's blocky engineer's print. When you're ready, V. She answered on the second ring herself, no secretary. Mrs. Hale, she said, before I'd finished my own name, I've been hoping you'd call. Your husband told me you would eventually. How soon can you come in? Francis Okonkwo's office was nothing like Howard Pratt's. Second floor of an old brick building in a part of town that still had hardware stores. Her desk was buried in paper. She was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and the steady, unhurried manner of a person who has watched a great many people fall apart in that chair and has learned not to flinch. Your husband hired me 14 months ago, she said once I was sitting down. Initially for something small. He'd noticed money moving in the company that he hadn't authorized, and he wanted a quiet set of eyes on it before he made accusations. That was Russell. He never raised his voice until he had the proof in his hand. What did he find? I said. She opened a drawer and set a thick accordion folder on the desk between us, and she rested her hand on it for a second like she wanted to give me a chance to breathe before she opened it. Then she opened it. Your stepsons have been bleeding Crestline for about 3 years, she said. Wesley first. His Dallas development went underwater in 2022, badly, and he started using your husband's company as a private bank. Loans against the company's assets, lines of credit, equipment financing on machines that were already paid for. He forged your husband's signature, Vivian, repeatedly, as a co-guarantor so that if the company couldn't pay, Russell would be personally on the hook. I felt the room go very quiet, the way it does underwater. Dean's part is uglier in some ways, she went on. Cleaner looking, harder to prove, but uglier. His private wealth practice in Scottsdale lost a great deal of other people's money. Retirees, mostly. He covered the holes by routing them through accounts that touched Crestline, using the company's good name and your husband's credit to keep the music playing. There are clients of his out there who think their savings are safe, and they are not. She slid a stack of documents toward me. Bank records. Loan agreements with a signature on them I knew was not Russell's, because Russell crossed his sevens like a European, and these sevens were bare. Surveillance photos of Wesley walking out of a private credit office. A summary from an investigator named Hank Delgado, laid out in flat, unsparing language. How much? I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. The company shows about $2.1 million in assets on paper, Francis said. It carries closer to $3.4 million in debt, most of it loaded on in the last 3 years, most of it personally guaranteed with a forged signature. Crestline is insolvent, Vivian. It has been for a while. The boys don't fully understand how deep it goes, because they each only know their own half. But Russell understood all of it. I thought about Wesley sliding that manila folder across the desk. The business stays in the family. It's a bloodline thing. They thought they were inheriting their father's company. They were inheriting a sinking ship they had personally drilled the holes in. Then they're not stealing a fortune, I said slowly. They're inheriting a disaster. Now you're thinking like your husband. For the first time, Francis almost smiled. But that's only half of it. Let me show you the part Russell wanted you to see most. She handed me a single document, bound, official, stamped. A will, dated 9 weeks before Russell died. Howard Pratt is working from a will that's 3 years old, she said. An old version Russell kept on file with Pratt's office and never bothered to retrieve, because once he understood what the boys were doing, he stopped trusting that office. This is the real one. Executed here, witnessed here, registered. It supersedes everything Pratt has. I read it. The legal language swam at first, and then resolved. And when it resolved, I had to put my hand over my mouth. The will left everything to me. The house, the cottage, the company, and something I had never heard of called the Hale Family Trust, into which Russell had quietly moved the bulk of the wealth he'd built over 40 years. Not in the house, not in the company, in a trust that only I controlled. "How much is in the trust?" I asked. "Investments, a stake he sold in a supplier 2 years ago, the proceeds from a piece of land off Reading Road." "6.2 million," Francis said. "Liquid or near it, untouched by the company's debt, untouchable by the boys. $6.2 million. I had been told 3 days earlier to make peace with $80,000 and a $10,000 hole, and the whole time the man I'd buried had left me a fortune behind a wall his sons couldn't climb. "The life insurance," I said, almost afraid to, "is for $400,000, not $80. The boys either lied to you or were lied to. Either way, they were wrong." She took off her glasses. "Vivian, there's one more thing, and it's the thing Russell cared about most, so I want you to hear it slowly. The will gives you sole discretion over what your stepsons receive. Read the clause." I found it. "I leave to my wife, Vivian Hale, full and final discretion to determine what, if anything, my sons Wesley and Dean shall receive from my estate, trusting her judgment in this above my own." He could have cut them off cleanly, Francis said. He could have had them arrested. The forgery alone is a felony, and the fraud against Dean's clients is worse. Russell had the evidence to send both his sons to prison, and he chose not to. He left it to you instead. He wanted you to decide. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would he put that on me?" Francis was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled a sealed envelope from the folder, my name on the front in Russell's hand. "He wrote you this. He said not to give it to you until you'd seen the rest, or you wouldn't believe it." I read his letter in my car in the parking lot because I couldn't read it in front of anyone. "Viv, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and the boys have shown you exactly who they are, which means you already know the worst of it. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I needed to be certain, and then once I was certain, I was too sick to do anything but build the box and put you safely inside it. Here's what I couldn't make myself say out loud. They're my sons, and I love them, and they are not good men. I've known it longer than I've admitted it. I kept giving them chances because that's what a father does, and every chance I gave them, they used to take more. I'm done giving chances, but I couldn't be the one to end it. A man shouldn't have to choose his wife's safety over his own children, and then live in the same house with that choice. So I'm dead by now, and I'm handing you the choice instead, and I know that isn't fair, and I'm doing it anyway because you are the only person in my life who ever decided things the right way. The company is a trap I left for them. They built it themselves. I just didn't fill the hole back in. If you give them Crestline, you're not giving them a gift. You're handing them the bill for everything they did. The papers Francis has will make sure the bill lands where it belongs. Whatever you choose it for you. Not for them, not even for me. You spent 19 years choosing for everybody else. Choose for Vivian now. I noticed everything. I noticed you. I'm sorry I waited until I was dying to make sure you'd be all right. Take the money. Take the house if you want it, or sell it and go somewhere with water. Don't look back at them. They won't be looking back at you. Yours, always and even now. R. I sat in that parking lot for a long time. A man delivering newspapers went by on a bicycle. The sun moved. When I finally drove home, I understood that the grief I'd been carrying had not gone anywhere, but it had company now, and the company was clear-eyed and patient and not the least bit afraid. Dean called the next morning, warm as a salesman. "Viv, hey, Camille and I want to have you over for dinner. Just family. We hate that the last few days have been all paperwork and lawyers. Let's just be people for one night." Camille was Wesley's wife, so it was to be Wesley's house. They wanted me on Wesley's territory, surrounded by Wesley's things, where the pressure could come from 3 directions at once. "That sounds lovely," I said. "What time?" 7. "And Viv, you've handled all this so gracefully. Dad would be proud. Dad would be proud. If only Dean knew what was in Dad's letter about gambling debts dressed up as private placements and the retirees whose savings he'd burned." "Thank you, Dean," I said. "That means a great deal." I dressed carefully that evening, not to impress them. to remind myself that the scared woman from the study was a costume I could take off whenever I chose. Wesley and Camille lived in a glass and stone house in a development Wesley himself had built, which I now understood was part of why he was drowning. Camille met me at the door in a dress that cost more than my first car, and she folded me into an embrace that touched nothing but air. "Vivian, you poor thing, you look wonderful. How do you do it?" "Clean living," I said, and she laughed too brightly and didn't get the joke. Inside it was all surfaces, new cars in the driveway, a kitchen the size of a chapel, art on the walls chosen by someone paid to choose it. A year earlier, I'd have found it intimidating. Now I walked through it doing arithmetic, and the arithmetic said, borrowed, 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 due. Wesley poured me a glass of wine I'm sure was expensive and tasted like every other glass of wine. Dean arrived 20 minutes later, kissing my cheek, asking after my health, performing the role of the loving stepson with the commitment of a man who'd never quite gotten the lead before and was determined to be noticed. Dinner was elaborate and tense. Camille had made something French and complicated. The conversation circled and circled, and finally Wesley set down his fork and got to it. "Howard tells me you've been a little hesitant about signing," he said. "I want you to know there's no pressure, but the longer it drags, the worse the medical thing gets, and we'd hate for the interest to eat into your insurance." "I appreciate that," I said. "I really do. Although I have to admit I've gotten curious about a few things, going through Russell's office." The temperature at the table dropped. I watched it drop. "Curious how?" Dean said, careful. "Oh, you know how Russell was. Meticulous to a fault. I keep finding papers I don't understand. Bank statements for accounts I've never heard of. Loan documents for the company with the strangest signatures on them." I took a small sip of wine. "And I found his old voicemails. There's a lovely one near the end where he tells me to go see somebody named Francis about the rest of it. Do either of you know a Francis?" Wesley's hand stopped halfway to his glass. Just stopped, in the air, for a half-second too long. "No idea," he said. "Probably nothing," I said. "An old colleague, although she had a whole file on Crestline, which seemed odd." Camille stood up so fast her chair scraped. "Who wants dessert? I made a tart." She fled to the kitchen. Dean had gone the color of the tablecloth. Wesley recovered first, the way men like Wesley always recover, by getting aggressive. "Vivian." He leaned forward, paternal, condescending, the same tone his father never once used on me. "I'm going to give you some advice as family. People prey on widows, they sense the money and the grief, and they swarm. This Frances person, whoever she is taking advantage of you. Bring me whatever she gave you and let me protect you from it. Dad would want me to." "That's so kind," I said. "I'll think about it." "Don't think," Wesley said, and for 1 second the mask came all the way off and I saw what was underneath, which was fear. "Just bring it to me, tomorrow." After dessert nobody wanted to eat, Wesley walked me to my car. He held the door and leaned down into the window. "Whatever you found in that office," he said low, "you don't understand it. You were never part of the business side. Bring it to me and let me handle it, and I promise you'll be taken care of." "I know you'll handle it, Wesley," I said, and I meant something he couldn't hear. "Good night." In my mirror driving away, I watched him standing in the floodlit driveway with his phone already pressed to his ear, calling Dean, or calling Howard, or calling whoever you call when the widow you wrote off starts saying the name of the woman who has your forged signatures in a drawer. My own phone rang before I reached the highway, a number I didn't know. "Mrs. Hale," said a calm voice. "Francis, I'd put money on you having dinner with the boys tonight, and I'd put more money on you rattling them. Did you?" "I think I did." "Then we should talk before they do anything stupid. Can you come in the morning? It's time to decide what you actually want, and I don't mean what you want to do to them. I mean what you want for yourself. Russell was very clear that those are two different questions." I barely slept, and the not sleeping was different from the grief not sleeping. It had edges. By morning, I knew my answer, and I knew it wasn't about Wesley and Dean at all, which was the strange part. Russell had been right. They were two different questions. What did I want for myself? I wanted to be done. I wanted to never again sit in a beige room while men in good suits decided what I was worth. I wanted water, like Russell said. I wanted to give back the years I'd spent making other people's lives run smoothly and spend whatever was left running my own. And what did I want for them? That one was simpler and harder. I didn't want them in prison, not out of mercy exactly. Prison would have made me the villain in their story, the gold-digging stepmother who put the sons away, and I refused to spend the rest of my life as a character in their grievance. I wanted something cleaner than revenge. I wanted them to receive in full the thing they had asked for. I wanted to give the greedy heirs exactly what they wanted, and let what they wanted be the punishment. "You're sure?" Frances said when I told her. "You understand that if you transfer Crestline and the lake house to them, you are handing them $3.5 million in debt, much of it personally guaranteed in their own forged hands. When they accept those assets, they accept the liabilities. They become personally liable. The banks will come for everything they own." "I understand." "And the trust, the insurance, the house in Indian Hill, all of that stays with you, clean, untouchable." "Yes. There's one more piece." She slid a document across the desk. "If they're going to accept the company, the transfer documents have to be airtight, because the moment they realize what they've taken, they'll try to renounce it and claim fraud. So your husband had me draft the assignment language a particular way. When they sign to accept the assets, they also ratify every existing obligation against the company by name, including the guarantees bearing Russell's forged signature. The second they accept Crestline, they personally affirm those forgeries as valid debts they owe. They lose the ability to ever claim the signatures were fake, because they will have sworn the debts are real, and they waive any claim against the trust." I read the clause. It was one long, dense sentence, the kind Howard Pratt told me not to read too closely. "They'll never sign that," I said. "Not if they read it." "They won't read it," Frances said quietly. "They'll be too busy celebrating. People who think they've won stop reading. Russell counted on that. He knew his sons better than they ever knew him." She let that sit. "Here's what we do," she said. "We let Howard Pratt run his little closing. We let the boys believe they're getting everything, and you're getting your $80,000 and your 45 days. You sign your transfers, generously, gracefully, and then their own lawyer reads the assignment schedule aloud the way lawyers do, for the record, and somewhere in the middle of it he hits the sentence that tells him what his clients just did to themselves." She smiled, and it was not an unkind smile, but it was not a soft one either, and we'll all watch his face. The closing was set for the following Thursday, in Howard Pratt's chrome and glass conference room on the 14th floor, because Howard insisted on his own turf and I let him have it. It cost me nothing to let a man like Howard think the room was his. I dressed in navy. I parked in the garage and rode up alone. When the elevator opened onto Pratt's reception, I could already hear them, Wesley's voice carrying, Dean's laugh, the loose, easy sound of men who'd spent the week telling each other it was handled. They were all there, Wesley in a suit that fit him beautifully and a watch that fit him too well, Dean with a leather portfolio he never opened, Camille, who hadn't been invited but came anyway, in pearls, Howard Pratt at the head of the table, beaming, shuffling papers, the picture of a man billing by the hour for a deal he'd already lost without knowing it. And beside Howard, a younger lawyer I didn't recognize, the boy's personal attorney, a sharp-faced man named Garrett, who'd been brought in to make it all official, with a stack of documents and a pen, and the bored confidence of someone closing a routine transaction. I had asked Frances to wait in the lobby until I called. I wanted to walk in alone. I wanted them to see the woman they thought they'd beaten walk in alone and quiet and ready to sign. "Vivian," Wesley said, rising, all warmth now that he thought he'd won. "Thank you for coming. I know this is hard. Let's make it quick and painless." "Let's," I said, and I sat down, and I folded my hands the way Dean liked to fold his, and I smiled. Howard ran the room. He explained, for my benefit, in the slow voice men use for women they think are simple, that I would be signing releases waiving any claim to the estate, that I would receive the life insurance proceeds, that the family assets, including Crestline Millwork and the Cumberland property, would pass to Wesley and Dean. He asked if I understood. I said I understood completely. He asked if I had any questions. I said I trusted everyone in the room, which was the first lie I'd told all week and the only one I enjoyed. I signed where they told me. I signed the releases, the waivers, the quit claims on the company and the lake house, my signature small and neat on every line. Each time the pen moved, I watched Wesley relax another notch. By the third signature, he'd stopped watching me at all. He was watching the documents pile up on the closed side of the table, the side where everything became theirs. And that, Howard said, gathering the pages with a flourish, should do it. Garrett, anything from your side to make the transfer of the business assets formal? Just the assignment and assumption agreement, Garrett said, sliding a thick stapled document toward the brothers. Standard. The assignment of Cressline's assets to Wesley and Dean, with the corresponding assumption of the company's obligations. I'll read the operative language into the record, then we sign, then we're done. Camille had already started to smile. Dean had his pen out. Wesley leaned back in his chair like a man settling in for the end of a good meal. Garrett began to read. He read in the flat clip of a lawyer reading for the record, the words running together, the assigner hereby conveys, the assignee hereby accepts, the assets enumerated in Schedule A, the obligations enumerated in Schedule B, all of it gray and procedural and exactly as boring as a man like Garrett expected it to be. And then he reached the sentence. I watched it happen. I watched the exact instant. He read it the way he'd read everything before it, at speed, and then the words caught up to his understanding the way they sometimes do a beat late, and his voice slowed, and he read it again, this time really reading it. The assignees, Wesley Hale and Dean Hale, by their acceptance of the assets herein conveyed, do affirm, ratify, and personally assume each and every guarantee, note, and security instrument heretofore executed against Cressline Millwork, Incorporated, including without exception those instruments bearing the signature of Russell Hale, and do irrevocably waive any claim, defense, or recourse, whether in fraud or otherwise, against the assigner, the Hale Family Trust, or its trustee. Garrett stopped. The room was very quiet. Somewhere 14 floors down, a truck was backing up, beeping, faint through the glass. Garrett, Wesley said, what's the holdup? Sign it. But Garrett wasn't moving. Garrett had gone the specific shade of gray that men go when they've just understood that they walked their clients into a room they should have searched first. He set the document down very carefully, as if it had become hot. Wesley, he said, I need a minute with my clients, alone. What? Why? I need a minute, Garrett said. And the strain in his voice finally reached Wesley, who frowned and snatched the document and looked down at the page Garrett's finger was resting on. I will remember Wesley's face for the rest of my life. I will remember it the way you remember the moment a storm turns. He read the sentence. He read it again. And the color went out of him from the top down, his confidence draining like water out of a cracked basin. And when he looked up, he wasn't looking at Garrett. He was looking at me. What is this? He said. His voice had nothing left in it. It's exactly what you asked for, Wesley, I said. The company, the lake house, everything in the family, staying in the family, the bloodline, just like you wanted. Dean grabbed the document out of his brother's hands and read it himself, his lips moving, and I watched the second man fall. The signatures, Dean said. The guarantees. Those are... He stopped himself, because the only way to finish that sentence in front of everyone was to say those are forged, and to say that was to confess. Those are debts you're about to personally affirm as valid, I said gently. $3.5 million of them, against a company worth $2 million. The moment you sign, you own a company that's underwater by $1.5 million, and you own it in your own names, personally, with no way to ever claim the guarantees weren't real, because you'll have just sworn that they were. Howard Pratt had gone very still at the head of the table. Vivian, he said slowly, where did this language come from? This isn't from my office. The conference room door opened, and Frances Okonkwo walked in with her accordion folder under her arm, and she set it down in the center of the table like a woman laying down a winning hand. It came from mine, she said. I'm Frances Okonkwo. I drafted the late Mr. Hale's final estate documents, which supersede the 3-year-old version Mr. Pratt has been working from. Mr. Pratt, you might want to retrieve the actual will from the county registrar before you bill anyone else for today. It leaves everything to Mrs. Hale. I have never seen a room rearrange itself so fast. Howard Pratt sat back like he'd been pushed. Camille's pearls were at her throat in her clenched hand. Garrett was already pulling his clients toward the corner, whispering, and I could hear fragments. Do not sign. Do not sign anything. This is a disaster. We need to talk about the exposure. You can't do this, Wesley said, rounding on me, and now the fear had curdled into something meaner. You manipulated us. You sat at my dinner table. I sat at your father's funeral, I said, and my voice did not shake, while you carried in a folder. You told me I was getting $80,000 and a deadline to leave my own house. You invented $90,000 of debt to frighten me. You forged your dying father's signature on 3 years of loans. Don't talk to me about manipulation, Wesley. You're an amateur compared to your father, and your father loved you, and you broke his heart, and he still spent the last months of his life building you a door you'd be too greedy not to walk through. Frances opened the folder. She didn't have to. She did it for effect, and the effect landed. The bank records, the forged loan documents, Hank Delgado's surveillance photos, the summary of Dean's clients and their burned retirements. Here's where we are, Frances said to the room in the calm voice of a woman who'd rehearsed nothing because she didn't need to. Mrs. Hale has the legal right to give you nothing at all. She also has the evidence to refer both of you for criminal prosecution, forgery, bank fraud. In Dean's case, the misappropriation of client funds, which carries its own federal interest. She doesn't want to do that. She wants something simpler. She wants to give you exactly what you came here for. She slid the assignment agreement back into the center of the table. You can sign this, she said. You can take Crestline and the lake house and all the debt that rides with them, and you can spend the next several years explaining to creditors why you personally owe $1.5 million more than you're worth. Mrs. Hale will not pursue charges, provided you sign, you assume the obligations, and you never contact her again except through counsel. Or you can refuse, walk away with nothing, and discover what Mrs. Hale does with this folder. Those are the options. There is no third one. Wesley looked at the folder. Wesley looked at the door. Wesley looked at me one last time, and I watched him understand that there was no angle, no charm, no lever, that his father had thought of every move before Wesley had thought of his first. He set us up, Wesley said. There was almost wonder in it. No, I said. You set yourselves up. He just declined to clean up after you. There's a difference, and he wanted you to know it. Oh, they didn't sign that day. Garrett wouldn't let them, and I didn't expect them to. They took the documents and the threat and the folder's existence away with them, and they spent 11 days with lawyers trying to find the third option Frances had told them didn't exist. There wasn't one. In the end, they signed because the alternative was a courtroom where the forged signatures would be read into a public record and a prosecutor would start asking Dean's retirees if they'd like to testify. Prison was the only thing worse than the bill, and the bill was the thing they'd asked for, so they took the bill. They accepted Crestline and the lake house and $3.5 million of debt with their own names on it, and the day they signed I felt nothing in particular, which surprised me. I'd expected triumph. What I felt was tired and free and ready to be somewhere with water. I want to tell you what happened to all of them, because I know you're wondering, and because Russell believed that consequences only count if you have the nerve to watch them. Crestline went into bankruptcy 14 months later. The creditors had been patient only as long as they believed Russell Hale's name was behind the loans, and once they understood that name had died and been replaced by his over-leveraged sons, the patience evaporated. Wesley filed personally not long after. The glass and stone house in his own development was the first thing to go, sold by a bank at a price that embarrassed everyone. Camille filed for divorce before the moving truck arrived, which told me everything about that marriage I'd suspected and never said. Dean's situation was worse and slower and uglier. His clients in Scottsdale had begun asking questions on their own, and when his finances collapsed, there was nothing left to plug the holes, and the holes became visible. The last I heard, he was working out a settlement with the regulators that would let him avoid the federal interest Frances had warned him about, but only barely, and only because he'd cooperated. He moved back in with his mother, Russell's first wife, a woman who had never liked me and now had 2 ruined sons to keep her company. Neither of them ever contacted me again. The bridges, as Russell would have said, stayed burned, and I have never once wished they hadn't. Howard Pratt called me 3 times in the weeks after, his voice going from indignant to wheedling to silent. I let Francis answer the 3rd call. I understand he no longer practices estate law in this county. Here's the part nobody expects, and the part I'm proudest of, so I'll tell it slowly. When Cresslane went to bankruptcy auction, its assets were sold off to satisfy the creditors. The building, the machines, some of them the same machines Russell had bought used in 1989 and rebuilt with his own hands, the name, and the 40 employees, the men and women who'd done nothing wrong, who came to my Christmas parties, whose children I'd watched grow up in photographs on the company bulletin board, were about to lose their jobs in a collapse 2 brothers had caused and a father had refused to prevent. So I bought it. Through the trust, clean, with my own money, at auction, free of every dollar of debt the brothers had loaded on. I bought Russell's company back out from under the wreckage his sons made of it, and I kept the floor open, and I kept the 40 people, and I hired a manager Russell had trained years ago and trusted, a quiet woman named Inez who'd been passed over for promotion 3 times because she wasn't a Hale by blood. I made her president. She runs it better than anyone in that family ever did. I don't go in often, but there's a photograph on the wall in the front office now, the only thing I asked Inez to hang. Russell and me at that county fair, both of us holding lemonade, both of us squinting into the sun. The men on the floor know who he was. They didn't know me, not really, in all those 19 years. They know me now. I bought a clapboard house on Mobile Bay, in a little town in Alabama called Fairhope, where the streets run down to the water and the sunsets over the bay are the kind of thing people drive hours to see. It cost a fraction of what was in the trust. I have a porch. I have a garden I'm learning, badly, with roses that keep dying and one stubborn fig tree that won't. I take a watercolor class on Tuesdays, and I am the worst one in it, and I don't care. For 19 years, I was Russell's wife and Wesley and Dean's stepmother, and I let those words do the work of telling people who I was. It turns out I'm someone else underneath all that. I'm a woman who can sit very still at a conference table while 2 men hang themselves with a sentence their own lawyer reads aloud. I didn't know that about myself. Russell did. He noticed everything. I set up a fund, too. Nothing grand. A scholarship at the trade school where Russell took night classes as a young man, for kids who want to learn the work he loved, the joinery and the millwork and the patient old craft of making something out of wood that will outlive you. It's in his name. It's the only legacy with the name Hale on it that I had any hand in, and it's the only one I'd want. Sometimes in the evenings, when the fog comes in off the bay the way it does, I think about the choice Russell handed me, the choice he couldn't make himself. Whether he was right to leave it to me, whether I chose well, and then I remember his letter, the line I read in that parking lot with my hand over my mouth. Choose for Vivian now. I did. I finally did. Now I'm curious about you, the one who stayed with me all the way to the end. If you'd been sitting in my chair with that folder on the table and those 2 men across from you, what would you have done? Would you have signed the papers and walked away clean? Would you have fought? Would you have given them exactly what they asked for, the way I did, and let the asking be the punishment? Tell me down in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from, because I read them, and I like knowing where this story has reached. And if this one stayed with you, I've left 2 more on the screen now, both of them favorites around here, and both of them, I promise, will surprise you the way this one did. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.